firstly, in terms of the house rules, one, to advise you that we are recording this particular session. And it is going to be available if you send an email through to the ISCA, if you would like to get a recording of this particular session. The second house rule is that we will ask that you put yourselves on mute, particularly during the presentation. If you do have any questions, you can either keep them until the end of the presentation, or you are also welcome to put your questions in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat throughout, and once the presentation is over, we'll then just go through some of the questions that are in the chat. We also welcome comments as well, because we really like to have this as a quite an have a discussion in terms of the session, and we're able to discuss with this presenter. And then the third house rule is that should you enter and you are not on mute, we will be putting you on mute. It doesn't mean that if you do have questions later, you cannot ask the questions, but we just try and ensure that everybody is on mute, even if you might have forgotten, because it tends to just distract the presenters if there's some background noise whilst they're presenting. And then finally, we do like to have an engaging session. We do recognize that there are quite a lot of people who are in the audience who also have expertise in this particular field. So we also welcome discussions, comments, engagement throughout the session. So with those house rules out of the way, I would really like to take this opportunity to then welcome our speaker. We are really quite fortunate to have Dr. Ngwenya with us. He has over 38 years public sector experience in various leadership and managerial roles, from education, administration to treasury. So we are really going to be getting some great insights, particularly from a public sector perspective. He's currently a Chief Director and Head of Capacity Building at the Gauteng Provincial Treasury. He holds a PhD in Managerial Leadership, as well as 2 master's degrees, one in Business Administration and a second one in Public Administration. Not only that, in terms of the academic experience, we are fortunate that he is also a certified executive coach. So I'm doing a plug for him if anyone needs coaching. And he's also an academic supervisor. So with that great introduction, as you can see, we are really going to get some great insights, and looking forward to the session. I'm going to hand over to you, the good doctor, to take us through our first the 4th Game Changer series for today. Welcome, and over to yourself.
Thank you, Ayanda. Yeah, I feel humbled to be part of this august audience, but nevertheless, look at me as part of you. I am still a civil servant, a hardcore one. Like Ayanda said, I've worked in different setups under different circumstances, and I kind of have a very, very good sense of the developments within the public space. But I'll confine myself this afternoon to a few ideas which relate to the theme of this session. Once more, good afternoon, colleagues, and good afternoon, Prof. Ambe, for inviting me. Good afternoon, members of the council, if they are available, and all protocol observed. And this afternoon, I want to share with you our lived experiences at the Gauteng Provincial Treasury. We call it GPT. And I want to share which we believe is a game changer innovation within the e-commerce space. And I'll be using e-commerce and SCM interchangeably, deliberately so, because the innovation I'm talking about is more SCM related. I will also be sharing with you a few other innovations that are based on our IT infrastructure, quite a number of interesting developments, which then talk to the e-commerce in general.
Yes.
There's a background noise. Okay. Like I said, for the purpose of the discussion, I shall be using e-commerce, prof, and SCM interchangeably, deliberately so, because e-commerce is a broader umbrella. I want to go through the slides bit by bit. I will take you through the context or the background of our space in the Gauteng Provincial Treasury, so you have a sense of where we're coming from. But I'll spend a bit of time on what we call open tender innovation. In short, we call it OTP. So I'll be using OTP and open tender innovation. I'll spend a bit of time there because we believe that is our game changer innovation within the broader space of supply chain management. I will also share a bit of lessons learned because every project has its pros and cons. So what is it that we have learned? What is it that we believe should happen in future? But equally important, I will touch base on 4 or 5 either other IT-based innovations, which then talk to the broader e-commerce space. And I would also bring in a bit of context in the government because we operate within a political space and there are certain mandates that come from our legislature which we need to execute as practitioners. So I'll bring that one in. At times, some of the mandates do not necessarily follow what you would call legislative prescripts, but I'll talk to you briefly about those ones. But a few challenges that we have encountered, and most important, a few ideas of what we think should be the trajectory of e-commerce in general, because the world is changing as I'm speaking now. And for instance, the jobs that you and I are occupying may not be existing 10 years down the line. So there is a need for us to realign, and more importantly, to prepare the youngsters who will be the future innovators to be at the right time, right space, and be able to be comfortable with all the technological developments. So we have to look beyond our space. People talk about think outside the box, but I think we should think outside the clouds now. Like I said, this will be based on our lived experiences at the Gauteng Provincial Treasury. It is one of the 14 provincial departments in Gauteng, and the premier is David Makura, a very progressive visionary leader. And we are stationed, we control, shall I say, we are the bank of the province. We have our head of the department and also various programs. I will then be focusing on what we are doing there and how do we think SCM should position itself within the global and international competitive space. I think that is the most appropriate stance we are going to take. Now, this slide is very important, colleagues. In our engagements with lots of colleagues within the space and within the sector, there's always been an outcry that SCM, in particular, supply chain management, does not enjoy its correct status within the public sector. If we are lucky enough, you'll find that the highest official occupying that space is the chief director or a director in some instances. However, the smart province of Gauteng, Treasury in particular, we decided to do it differently. Our highest official within the supply chain, we call it Provincial Supply Chain Management, is a Deputy Director General. I think even National Treasury, I think if we're not on par, we might be above National Treasury in terms of our structure. And most importantly, Ayanda, the head of that structure is a lady. Is a lady, her name is Nombulelo Begi, no relation to the former president. She has joined in as well. So we have a very top official, or the structure, the highest official within our structure is the DDG level. That should be commended. I think, Prof, that's one of those game changers we have arrived. So that at that policy making position, we can make some inputs and you can influence the direction of supply chain management and e-commerce in general. Because within the provincial treasury, we do have other units like the provincial government or governance, which drives especially the automation of some of the payment processes, but we're an integrated organization. And before DDG Mbeg, we also had our head of the department of DG, a lady as well. She has now joined the national government. So we have always been on the side of women empowerment, Ayanda. So we are leading in that space. Now, that structure in itself has three main programs. They are headed by chief directors, three chief directors reporting to the DDG. For your information, all three of them are ladies. And where do I stand? My portfolio is within the office of the head of the department because of the transversal nature of the kind of work I'm doing. So we're three chief directors. Now, what do? One chief directorate deals with policy, norms, and standards. And that is where the whole thing of acquisition and tender lies. There's a chief director, a lady there. Then there's a lady who runs contract management, a lady from Pretoria. And then there's a lady, we still have a vacancy for the supply development. We've advertised that position, and ladies who must apply. But I think the guys must also apply because we are becoming an endangered species. So, but we have three chief directorates there. Then of interest, Prof, it will be what do we do below that? There are 6 directorates. They're headed by directors. The first one, contract management. There has been a problem in that arena because contracts expire and at times are not renewed, and then suppliers and vendors are paid outside the contracts. You know what it means to the Auditor General. We deviate that. So we have therefore directed that manages that in a big way. And to some extent, we as a province are beginning to get that right. Then we have supply development, which is a far cry because that area is not very developed. The suppliers from whom we should source goods and services need a lot of help. Let me make an example. We have in Gauteng, through our provincial priorities, a drive to buy our goods and services from previously disadvantaged communities. In our case, the township. When we go there to source these goods and services, we pick up problems. Most of the SMMEs, the small guys, are involved in, shall I say, hair salons, a bit of spaza shops and stuff like that. But these kinds of services do not fit into the needs of government. So we have a problem there. We need to develop that space so that when we say Black economic empowerment, we really are talking about our entrepreneurs who are empowered and they who are very innovative and they can produce. Because if we don't do that, we will run the risk of tokenism. We run the risk of being used as or fronting for other bigger organizations. So that, as Provincial Treasury, we took up as one of the key thrusts that need our attention. There are lots of development from the province that we have started initiating in terms of developing our supplies, but it's a huge gap. And I would even extrapolate that the whole country suffers from that. We talk, but when it gets to the real delivery, there is a problem. Then the third directorate is strategic sourcing. This, ladies and gentlemen, is also a very, very, very underdeveloped area. At the moment, in the Gauteng province, the directorate is now located, or it exists, only within the provincial supply chain management. If you look at the various departments, 13 of them, if we exclude Treasury, what we do have is that the head of supply chain does almost everything, even market research, you name it. It's not an elevated directorate, and we believe it's very crucial because it can look into things like economies of scales and look into the trends that we need to follow, be a trendsetter. We need, maybe as a government, to really look into that space and make sure that it's also elevated. Then there is the market research, which definitely is not happening in various agencies and departments, including our municipalities. However, at Treasury, we do have a section, a directorate that looks into all sorts of market fluctuations, latest products, commodities, and so on, grouping of them. When we build the hospitals, what is new, and so on. We have a dedicated team that does that. If you can have that across the province, that would be quite an achievement. Then the big one that we have, which I'll talk to, is the open tender innovation. That, ladies and gentlemen, is quite big, especially in government. Yes, admittedly, it's happening in the private sector, in some other pockets of government, but to elevate it to a level at which it is at the moment in Gauteng, we believe it is a game changer, and I'll talk through to that. Then we also have a unit for compliance, monitoring, and evaluation. In itself, it is very, very crucial, and it deals with compliance issues, legislation, and so on. So those directorates, we believe, for now, are sufficient to ensure that Provincial Treasury functions. I must mention in passing that we can pride ourselves as Provincial Treasury of maintaining our clean audit status over the last few years, 4 or 5 years. It is precisely because of the input from such programs, directorates, and the other programs within Treasury. So because we're doing things right, therefore, we believe that we're setting the trend for the Gauteng provincial government. Here's the big one, the open tender. It is an innovation. It is a game changer. Why did we decide on this as government? It is because accountability in government has always been a sore. The public out there cries foul because when things go wrong, there is no one taking accountability. So from a government perspective, we want to promote accountability in the things that we do, especially in the acquisition aspect, in the tender aspect, because if we don't get it right and we have a problem, even at this point in time, our government suffers from that aspect, because if we don't manage that aspect properly, we have a problem of all sorts of challenges from the public out there. Transparency is another aspect we want to promote. All these are anchored in our legislations. I'll talk to you legislation soon. The whole questions of ethical leadership, ethical conduct, the top of corruption and so on. We want to make our contribution to eliminate that. And the integrity of our entire procurement system in particular needs to be promoted. We are doing our bit to do that. But what is important, the last bullet, public scrutiny regarding decisions made on tender. Ladies and gentlemen, if government can get this one right, we shall all be smiling, because there will be no accusation, counter accusations of some kind of manipulation or external influence. If the public can trust the process, then the public can trust the public service. Now, like I said, whatever we do must be anchored on some legal framework. You all know, I'm not going to go through into details, the section 217, Prof, of the Constitution. But if you look at the pillars, the 4 of them, the second one talks about open and effective competition. We want to promote that. And the last one there talks about accountability. We want to promote that. Now, how do we then, as a province, enable the Constitution to make that a reality? After a lengthy period of consultation and deliberations, consulting stakeholders, consulting departments, the process was not easy. At the end of the day, our legislature, through the leadership of the cabinet and the premier, managed to get an act called Gauteng Open Tender Act. You know what that means? It means we can then enforce it right across the province. So we have an act. And with an act comes regulations. So officially we have an act that drives this innovation, which was started by Treasury. In fact, it was started by the former MEC Barbara Creasy, who is now a minister. This started at that time. We now have an act. So let me share with you what exactly we are doing. Well, obviously, we had to look at what the PFMA is saying and to think that the triple PFA and other regulations, your triple B, EE, and so on, but we are operating within the space. And these, or the framework, influences how we operate in the SCM space and in the e-commerce space in general. Now, why did we embark on OTP? Where we are at the moment, why do we need this? Because things have been quite okay, business as usual. Why do you bring these new things which are making us very uncomfortable? One, there were a few challenges. Challenges in the 3 committees. Sean, you know what I'm talking about. Your BSc, your bid specification committees, a very serious challenge, I must add, in terms of specifications there. Even to date, we have not resolved that. The bid evaluation committees, serious issues there in terms of the compliance aspect. The bid adjudication committee is worse. There has been accusations of manipulating that process. We said there are challenges. Let's open up the space. Let's open up that and see to what extent we can mitigate the challenges that are out there in the public. The second challenge relates to suppliers, how they conduct themselves. There has been allegations that they can also manipulate the process one way or another, remotely or not. So we had to make sure that they know the rules of the game. So it is a challenge. Hence, the question of supply development comes to play. Another challenge has been poor contract management. Like I said, there's an area there, there's a problem. There has been attempts in a number of government departments to say, let's issue a tender, and as a condition, we make it a bit of a joint venture. We have a small guy learning from the big one. But how do you manage, how do you monitor that? And it's a problem. And also some contracts come to an end, and at times they expire. To renew the whole process, it's just a mess. We said we need to make sure that contract management is managed properly. We look at the market research, which is virtually non-existent. Because of that, the pricing aspect of our goods and services are a problem. You can buy a loaf of bread for 20 rand, but you charge government 50 rand for a loaf of bread because government is not ready, is not, shall I say, has not done its research to say, hang on, this is what the market charges. So that is why we have a directorate that handles that. But how do you address all these challenges? And how do you manage poor governance? That then justifies the OTP. Just as a reminder, at the bid specification committee, as you all know, there's the 80-20 and the 90-10. From 500,000, in our case, up to 50 million, we apply the 80-20 principle. And the 20 stands for your BE points. And yeah, the pricing and functionality, they go into the 80. But when it crosses over to 50 million, we then apply the 90-10 ratios. And as is the standard thing, as you all know, this is not new to you, that tenders would at least be out there for 21 days. But if you want to shorten that, with the permission of your accounting officer, you can then apply and get approval. But what is new for us? This whole process is part of the open tender. We then introduced a quality assurance aspect. We have pre-qualified auditors. Where do they come from? From all the private auditing companies. Your Deloitte of this world, your PwC, any other small guys, any other person who is qualified. We've pre-qualified them and established, people use the word body shop of some sort. We pre-qualify them in terms of their capacity to deliver and their expertise. They are there, ready. Then when there is a need to engage them, we just ask for, we send an RFQ. RFQ stands for request for quotations. And then we engage them in terms of that, but we have a body shop already. So at the point of bid specifications, we then introduce that quality aspect, probity audit. We call it probity, but it's basically outside auditors who are there. So they work with the teams to make sure the specifications are compliant. I must admit that that iterative process is not an easy one. At times it's very stormy. It can even delay certain things, but we believe that it has to be done right rather than rushing things out there and pick up all sorts of litigation. So we have that quality assurance aspect. The second one, when it gets to the BC, where we do the administrative compliance, again, we have the auditors. I must mention that for each and every committee, we do send out an RFQ. Doesn't mean that if you were an auditor in the bid specification, automatically would go through the other levels. Not necessarily. For each level, we send an RFQ. If you're lucky to be appointed again, it's up to you, but it's an open process again. So at the bid evaluation committee, things also can be delayed because there's strict interpretation of the laws, the regulations. Let me make an example. You have bidders who have come through and they submit your SPD documents, the 9 of them, Sean, and you discover that there's something called a Commissioner of Oaths, affidavits. And you get documents that are signed by CA Chartered Accountants. You get documents that have 1 signature or 2 signatures. That causes a lot of problems. But debates go out there. We even involve the legal team to advise on certain disputes and so on. But it's done properly. I think down the line it will be easy for us. But it's also not an easy process, but there must be a quality assurance aspect, and we have it as Treasury. Then, why do we call it open? Why do we call it open tender? The next level, called bid adjudication, that is where the judges, the adjudicators come in. Ladies and gentlemen, it is at that point that we open the whole thing to the public. Let me just, before I get into details of that one, indicate that in terms of the bid specifications, in order to assist the process, we then have decided to establish what we call a provincial bid or provincial specification bank. In other words, we have a team that draws out commonly used commodities. There are specifications. We then populate the bank, and it is open to the departments to use. It is easy to do that. It is then updated from time to time. But we do exclude specifications that involve your housing, especially the housing infrastructure. Those ones are separate. But the commonly used commodities, I think this bank is beginning to make an impact, and it is electronically controlled. It is under the control of Treasury. We do use our sister department, the eGov, to assist us, but we are the custodian of this bank, especially in the BSC space. I've spoken to this one. What I want to mention, especially back to the specifications ones, is that even to date, ladies and gentlemen, there's a huge capacity problem in drawing out specifications across the country. So that level is still a challenge. The BC is basically, you could even call it a pre-adjudication phase. But once again, like I said, we do have the quality assurance layer of auditors. Now, here's the openness. When it gets to the level of deciding who should be awarded the tender, we open that process completely. Now, who gets invited? All the bidders, all of them, they are welcome to come in there. Where Treasury has made a facility available, big room, that meets our requirements, where all the bidders, if they opt to come, would sit and literally observe how we decide on the successful bidder. Now, in order to avoid a bit of chaos, we do not allow them to actively participate in terms of questions and so on, but they do observe. And they write, or their concerns, if there are any, they put them in writing, and within 7 days, they shall have forwarded them to the chairperson of the committee and be responded to. So if there is any dispute, it will be picked up by their concerns. So they are free to observe, they are free to listen to the BAC chairperson and his or her team presenting to the BAC, and they listen very attentively. I must confess that this has been quite an exciting development, and our service providers out there appreciated that very much. So that at the end of the day, if a successful bidder's name is announced, then it shall have been done through a process that is clear, that is open, that is transparent. And the auditors too have an input. The probity auditors make an input. So ladies and gentlemen, what am I saying? We've built in a quality assurance layer across our tender process, so that at the end of the day, the product that we say it is this that we decide upon is, I won't say it's perfect, but it's near perfect. So this is opening government to the people. And because we have now an act, in future, all departments, provincial departments, will be expected to apply the open tender. In fact, we've started through DDG Mbeki to roll out this process now. We have now regulations and we're enforcing it, but we're not enforcing it arbitrarily. We make sure that the department have the capacity to deal with this. In fact, what we are doing now is that we are now gradually handing over some of the processes. Maybe I should mention that initially, the procurement of the province during the GSSC days, the shared service days, was centralized within the province. So, but the process of decentralizing has started now. It started, I think, in 2012, when we then said, let's automate some of the processes, especially the payment part of it. We introduced SEP, that we can pay suppliers through SEP, which is faster than the best, and reconcile backwards. So, but even this open tender, it became centralized within Treasury. But right now, we are capacitating departments and overseeing them and assisting them so that they are familiar with the process. At the end of the day, they will run it and Treasury will play its oversight role as it should. But this is quite exciting for the province. I must confess, there is resistance here and there, but we're dealing with those processes. Now, just as a reminder, of late, as you all know, from 500,000 upwards, if the value of the goods, especially, open tender or tender system must kick in. What we're doing at the moment, because we're still running from the provincial department, from Treasury, any tender from 2,000 and above is automatically subject to the OTP. It must come to Treasury, it must follow the processes. Now, what happens to tenders whose value is between 500,000 and 2 million? We allow for now the departments to run with them, and Treasury officials play an oversight role, so that to make sure that there's compliance. At some point, we will from time to time even hand over a lot of the OTP tenders. And above million, we have not 50 million, it's still the 90-10, and still Treasury runs with it, and we have gazetted regulations. We have no problem at this point in time. Maybe it will be of interest to say how many of the tenders within the province have gone through the OTP, especially at an advertisement stage. It's just over 300,000, 300 of them. The amounts are, we're talking about billions and trillions there. But nevertheless, so we've managed to handle those kinds of volumes. Hopefully, as we decentralize the whole system to the provinces or to the provincial departments, the number might increase. Now, maybe lessons learned. What are the lessons learned? One, from the open tender, we still have an issue. Like I said, the specifications are still very, very poor. This then leads to the cancellation of a number of tenders, especially when the auditors pick it up and there's lots of challenges there. So we do cancel lots of tenders because specifications traditionally have been done incorrectly. So lots of cancellations, but we'll get there. So the open tender will then begin to address those things. But also traditionally, there has been an inadequate budget in some departments. What would happen is that departments will go all out and advertise and go through the entire process, only to find that there's no budget. When we check their budget allocation, there's no budget. And therefore, the tenders are withdrawn. So when it gets to the open tender, we'll make sure that those things are in place before we get embarrassed later on. And I mentioned earlier that the question of suppliers is a problem. We battle to get suppliers from, especially, shall I say, previous disadvantaged communities. And that leads to re-advertisement, or we then rely on the traditional multinationals, and we're trying to run away from that. But the question of suppliers is a big one. Supplier development, and I'll say entrepreneurship, also development. I think we have to reinforce that. Now, the involvement of the quality assurance layer of auditors, it's not without its own challenges. Obviously, auditors would always challenge a lot of things, and that leads to delays and targets not being met and so on. But I think it is a battle we should fight, and we'll get better with time. So what can be done to better in future? That's our insights or learnings. We need to develop internal capacity within agencies and departments. In other words, we must have auditors there, but we need to maintain the external auditors to work with our internal auditors, because there's a lot of money that we spend on consultation. So that we need to develop capacity there. The bid specification capability must be developed as a matter of agency. It is a serious, serious problem across all spheres of government, even our local sphere of government. And I would bet to say across the whole country, we have a serious capacity issue there. Strategic sourcing, it has to be institutionalized. It must be coupled with market research for specialized commodities, especially at agency or departmental level. We've got to strengthen that. And supplier development programs to assist upcoming suppliers. I'll talk to this issue when I conclude the presentation. We've got to do something about it. But what my DDG said yesterday when I talked, he said, look, please do mention that we need an improvement on planning and projections of procurement plans. When we do quality assured procurement plans from the departments, there's a serious issue on the planning and the projection. So it becomes a challenge, because when it gets to the open tender, we pick up those issues. So these are the things that we believe that in future, they can be done better. I think, let me quickly then, I think I'll briefly refer to the open tender at the end, but let me share with you some of the IT-related innovations within the space of Treasury, which in our context comprises capacity building. First, we have introduced what we call 15-day payment. You would know, colleagues, that in terms of regulations, you pay your suppliers within 30 days. But as Treasury, we decided to make it 15 days. In fact, it's beginning to work. Now, this is based on the automation of invoices. We ask our suppliers to submit, in fact, they register on a lot of our kiosks, our platforms. We've got mobile buses that go out there. So their mobile device, they register with us. Our IT is quite active together with our e-government colleagues, so that our suppliers then submit the electronic invoices. And we're not quite there, but I would say more than 60, 80% are already compliant. Once you have that, we just look at the three-way match. You know what I'm talking about? Your goods received, your quotation, and the quantities and stuff like that. Once we have the three-way match, then it's easy to pay. SAP will verify that, and payment will be done. And when it's done through SAP, overnight it's reconciled to BEST because government recognizes BEST system. So e-invoicing is eliminating lots of paper, especially in this era of whatever is worrying us in the country, COVID. So, but most important, it is more efficient. You save a lot on time, and it is kind of more accurate. So we have therefore the 15-day payment. So when the auditor say 30-day payment, we smile, said, oh, some of us, most of our departments are already compliant. Not all of them, but it's a very, very good system because we are paying within 15 days using SAP to a large extent, reconciling back to BEST. So SAP is one of those innovations. Well, we're using it for payment purposes. The second one, this is pretty unique, I think, for government. We have a system which works like a credit card. We call it a P-card payment. Now, why did we introduce this? It is a system to expedite payment to SMMEs, especially if their invoices are less than 10,000. Why should they wait for 30 days or 15 days? So what we do is, as Treasury, we've linked that payment system to the budgets of the departments, and their banking details has to be up to date, and a few properly screened officials are allowed to effect that payment. So you can get your money the next day. So we have this system, but as I say, it's very few officials, and it's meant to expedite payment for the SMMEs as long as the threshold is less than 10,000. This is another e-commerce innovation. The third one has to do with specifications. I said earlier that we are trying to make inputs or improvements in that arena. So what Provincial Treasury has done is to establish a portal or called a bank, where all these specifications, developed ones, are housed. And all our users have access to those, and they are updated regularly, but we do exclude the building and construction sector. So we found that to be quite helpful for departments that are smaller, who have capacity constraints, that as long as it's a ready-made electronic specification, it's easy to use. And then our market research guys make sure that even the pricing aspect is also made available. The e-tender, call it e-commerce if you so wish, what we want to achieve is an end-to-end process of the whole tender system now. I'm talking about real end-to-end, right from specifications right up to the adjudication process. Now, we are trying as a province to see how best we can do that, to eliminate paper completely. Now, there is already a blueprint, which is a draft, that is being discussed. And hopefully, at some point, we'll even have an act. In fact, if you picked up the media, they're already beginning to talk about this kind of an act that will be coming from the province to make sure that we have an end-to-end electronic a tender system. We believe that efficiencies will be improved, and then we'll eliminate laborious and manual paper-based systems. So that should be quite exciting. Let me talk briefly about some of the current practices that we are involved with, especially in the space of SCM, and that includes even GPG or Gauteng Provincial Government priorities. First, from the point of view of SCM professionalization, all our officials, Sean and SIDS guys, all our officials within the Provincial Treasury, within the SCM space, are affiliated with at least one or two professional bodies. In the provincial governance space, they would work with the auditing firms, auditing bodies. But in the supply, in the SM space, for now, SIPs enjoy lots of our subscriptions. All of them, including myself and the DDG, we are all part of SIPs. But hopefully with the new body that is coming, we'll migrate to the new body. But for now, at least, we make sure that we are all affiliated to a professional board. Secondly, we are promoting learnership programs in collaboration with the CETA, TETA, and National Treasury work together. We have been part of the pilot studies of exposing our learners who are employed in government department, SCM, especially local government, to a recognized qualification. Prof, you'd know that we set in those curriculum development committees, and eventually there is a qualification, and that is sponsored partly by our TETA and recognized the National Treasury. We have to date about 120 of the cohorts that are trained. We started in local government. NQF level 5, we are hoping to go to 6, 7, 8, and if need be 9. But for now, it's at provincial, at local government. We want to make sure that our provincial departments, inclusive of Treasury, become the next phase. We also have an internship program on an annual basis. I would say not necessarily, but every second year, we do take in graduates. I'm talking about graduates from universities who at least have something like a BCom qualification, and we employ them as Treasury. We place them at the various departments, put them under the CFOs for stewardship, and we monitor their progress. And this is appreciated in the province because we are making an input into making these graduates market ready. So some of the things we do there, and we also accommodate what the province expects of us to do. The DDG for supply chain management leads lots of roadshows to communities to expose them to what Treasury does, especially the tender opportunities and those kinds of things. But also in collaboration with our sister department, the economic development, there are incubator activities in the townships that are being run. We do make an input there. But the emphasis of all this is to make sure, especially in the incubator space, that they understand the regulatory requirements, and we focus on women, youth, development, and also we expose them to tender processes in government. What are the challenges that we sometimes pick up in terms of our own priorities as a province? We have been trying to target townships. There's a program we called Township Economy Revitalization, or TER, where we try and spend at least 30% of our procurement budget across the province to the SMMEs, especially township economies or entrepreneurs. That is where I said, ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem in terms of what government needs, which is not readily available. So it's difficult to meet those targets. Nevertheless, the targets are set for provincial departments, entities, and municipalities. The emphasis on local government is on location where they're located, and we also look at the designated groups, women, youth, and women with disabilities, and the military veterans as well. And there are monthly progress reports that are submitted to our MEC. So the biggest challenge for us is to meet these targets because they are very difficult to measure. Then give an example. For instance, how would you classify a business that has an office in Elof Street and it claims to operate in Alexander Township? Or vice versa, it has an address in Alexander Township, but it operates from Elof Street. So to verify those kinds of details are a problem. I'm talking about a provincial perspective where as a province, we're trying to empower our township. And there's something called township economy and so on. I said to you, we want to put legislation there to drive that process. But it is not an easy thing. The last time DDG reported at our provincial executive management team is that she managed to report an achievement of 50% of the 30. Now it's 15%, that's 50% of the 30. So it is a moving target, it's difficult, but we're trying to do the best we can. Now, this is the last thing I want to talk to you, ladies and gentlemen or colleagues, that in future, we want to continue with the certification program of our SCM practitioners. They should not just end up with the NQF level 5, they must go up to your 7, your 8, and so on. Obviously, that needs a lot of money, a lot of budget. And if the CETAs are there to help us, that's okay. But it means as a province, we don't have the money now, but in future, we want to drive that process so that from an empowerment point of view, from a capacity point of view, we have properly qualified practitioners. In fact, we are then hopefully, we're going to make it a requirement that any practitioner within the space of SCM must have a qualification, not just any other person who has been dumped into that field. We'll very soon eliminate that and make sure that they are properly qualified. That talks to professionalization. Now, a few things that we believe we should try and include, especially, Prof, especially in your domain there and the council, we believe that there's an angle of entrepreneurship that we need to include to empower our graduates. We say this from our own experience. We have graduates from the universities and we put them into our internship programs. They go through there and all that, what they are waiting for is to be employed. We don't have job opportunities. Imagine if as part of the program, we taught them some skills to start their own businesses, even if they do get some tender or they join the consortium, they make a consortium of some sort, and they are taught those skills as part of a broad curriculum of SCM. And we encourage them to start small businesses. This whole thing of youth unemployment, we can literally try and manage that process. We can even include things like startups, microfinancing strategies. Are you aware that our youth don't even know that there is, or there are agencies like Umsobo, National Youth, and many others that are ready to assist, but no one knows how. They don't know how to complete the application. They don't know how to drop a business plan, but we believe that if we can just accommodate that and assist the youth, so a full package is given to the youngsters as part of an SN curriculum, that in future would really help. But also, if they could be able to use the platforms that are created by e-commerce. Most of the youngsters have thousands of followers. What do they use? Their own smartphones. That's part of e-commerce. And there's high growth entrepreneurship, there's literature available. we can ask them to use those kinds of things. Because if we don't allow them to maximize the available platforms, the tendency is, I want to be a tender entrepreneur. I want to get tenders from government. We are creating an unnecessary welfare state, and that is not sustainable, ladies and gentlemen. But if we can equip them with the tools from an SCM curriculum, to some extent, over time, they might be able to say, yes, I'm going to get a tender, but a tender, if I do get it, it is just a catalyst for me to start my own business and go global, use the platform and sell my products in Japan, America, wherever. I shall have benefited. In that way, we are not giving them fish to eat, but we're teaching them how to fish. And I think SCM can play a bit of a role there by opening up this curriculum, and through, if the tender, the rotation system, if there is something, but they would not look up to the big brother who's government to feed them for life. We do not want that. They must feed themselves. There are opportunities globally, internationally, even within SADC itself. And if you can open up entrepreneur opportunities or expose them to those kinds of things, that's where innovation comes in. I'm saying, let's look at the curriculum, see how best we can accommodate some of the new things that are coming so that we exploit, we leverage off the existing platforms, and we, under the umbrella of e-commerce, I think we can assist our youngsters. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to conclude by saying, let us contribute toward the development of the youth who become entrepreneurs, self-employed, by using our tender system, our SCM, our e-commerce platforms, and use what is available from government as a catalyst for the establishment of new businesses, which will be based on e-commerce platforms, so that the youngsters can compete in a technological, international, and globally entrepreneurial space. And SCM and e-commerce platforms can be the platform to provide the youngsters with not fish, but with the capacity to feed themselves for life. Let's turn our youngsters, through the limited influence we have in the supply chain environment and e-commerce, to a world of sustainability, business development, and who knows, a better country. As they say, it is all in our hands. Let's do our bit, and I thank you. Amen.
Thank you very, very, very insightful presentation. You have challenged all of us in provincial treasuries and provincial government to really step up and begin to take some of the practices that Gauteng provincial government is taking in terms of the SCM space. You really put that challenge to all of us. I've also really liked that you have brought in aspects of youth, which is a problem that we have in our country right now, in terms of how do we bring them into the fold and how do we get them involved, getting them in terms of tendering and becoming entrepreneurs. I've really enjoyed that, as well as looking in terms of how do we develop ourselves as SCM practitioners. So really a big challenge. You've really thrown it out there, and we need to take on this challenge. And I like to say maybe even do better than Gauteng for the good of the SCM practice and actually for the good of the economy. With that, I'm going to invite the audience to ask questions on the presentation. You are welcome to put up your hand in terms of raising your hand. I'll give a few seconds for you to think about some of the questions whilst I look at some of the questions that have come out in the chat. And Mr. Sean Scott has asked a question here in terms of looking at how can the Gauteng province expedite the open tender process in a virtual world. We've spoken about COVID, we've really got, everything has gone online. And he's asking, is there not an big opportunity in terms of to avoid the practicalities of meeting rooms, etc. He also asks in terms of perhaps even looking at open tender process utilizing YouTube. So I will ask you in terms of a question out there, how can we really improve the open tender process in this virtual world? Dr. Ngwen.
Oh, thank you, Sean. Yes, very, very interesting. I think my DDG will agree that the virtual world in terms of OTP sounds like a very practical and it is doable. In other words, it is doable. And I think the Provincial Treasury will look favorably at that aspect, especially if you look at the COVID scenario, which limits any kind of physical contact, even beyond that. And if I could participate at the comfort of my home and as a vendor or as a supplier or as a bidder, that would be helpful. What I'm saying that's something that we will take home and see how best we can. In fact, personally, as a person, I think it opens up opportunities for us. The YouTube scenario, I cannot give you an answer except that it's something that I think it falls into the space together with the virtual thing, the e-commerce thing. I think all I'm saying that these are brilliant ideas. We will certainly deliberate on them and see how best as Treasury or Provincial Treasury, how practical it is. But in short, we welcome that and we appreciate your input. In fact, it is appreciated. And I'll even tell the DDG PSCM that, look, let's look at that. Let's talk to the powers that be. But it is quite exciting. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Lebogang Musoma asks, have you considered including BEC as part of the open tender process?
Yeah, Lebogang, we've got to start somewhere. At the moment, let me tell you what, because the whole OTP or open tender system is managed centrally by the Treasury. And we are in the space where we are rolling it out to the departments. I think from a capacity point of view, we could not open it up ourselves. But I don't see any reason why, as we roll out, that we cannot do that. By the way, we have regulations too that will back us up. At the moment, it was purely, I think, in terms of it was a pilot phase, a pilot project. We want to see if it works. If it works at that level, and why don't we take it up to the level of BC? But remember, there will be capacity issues. But I'm saying that the reason why we did not, because we had to start somewhere. And as we roll out and as we mature, I see no reason why we cannot explore that option as well. In fact, up to the point of specifications, if that is the case. But remember, we are trying to say at what point do you interface with the public? At the moment, the point of interface is at the point of the adjudication. That is where the public gets involved. Remember, we're trying to address the sentiments that are out there. BC, yes, okay, but it's more of an internal thing. But as I say, at some point, if the time is right, I don't think it will stop us. But for now, the focus has been to correct our image, to make sure that the legitimacy, there's transparency, but the only point of contact has always been at that point of adjudication. But in future, yeah, that's a point to consider. But for now, it is at that point of adjudication because of the involvement of the public.
Thank you for that. I'd like to take this opportunity to ask anyone in the audience they're welcome to take themselves off the mic and ask a question directly.
Or comment.
Or comments, correct, or comments.
You have been a good teacher.
Well, I'll go back to the comments
no,
on the
I think, thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. And good afternoon. Mr. Mngwenya, thank you very much for such a thought-provoking presentation you have made. And also, it shows that we have a lot as provincial treasuries, because I'm from the Provincial Treasury. We've got a lot as provincial treasuries that we can learn and share from our experience. And the combination of the experiences that you are sharing and some of the experiences we have in Limpopo and some other provinces, I'm certain we are equally equipped to lead the transformation within supply chain management space within the public sector. And thank you very much for a nice presentation.
Thank you, my friend. You and I must, what do you call it, exchange? We must do some exchange. We go and spend some time with you, and you spend time with us so that we can learn from each other. But thanks a lot, my friend. We can move this country. We can change things here. And it's all in our hands.
Sure.
Thank you. There was also a hand raised by Nombulelo Mbeki. I also know that.
That's my DDG.
Yes, she had her hand raised, but she also did take her hand down. So I just want to.
No, she must put it up again.
She must put it up again. Yes.
Yes.
Please speak.
That is if you're still there, not been called by the powers that be.
I was actually going to say that while she is maybe trying to multitask, I'm going to also note that Sean Scott has his hand up. So to ask Sean Scott to take themselves off mic.
Thank you, Ayanda. Thank you for the opportunity. And just firstly, to thank Dr. Mngwenya for a great presentation and for sharing those insights. And these are just thoughts, Dr. Mngwenya, just to kind of challenge some of the thinking and assist. And one of those is the approach that the province seems to be taking around open tendering is around the bid adjudication committee, as you rightfully say. And what that does, though, is it starts to kind of constrain the province, because it's, you know, it needs to be managed, it needs to be planned. If we have those physical BAC meetings again, and we get back into hiring big venues and having people in the audience come along, that's quite costly for the department, it's quite costly for the province, and it's quite practical. It can be impractical, and that's why you kind of find yourself limiting this to, you know, tenders above 2 million or the larger tenders, for example. So just to say, hey, maybe there are some other points in the tendering process that we could look at making open. And one of those, I don't want to, I just want to help there, Ayanda, is not necessarily YouTube, but making the tender opening process a YouTube recorded process. So you recall the days, Dr. Ngwenya, when we used to have open, we used to open the tenders. And we don't do that so much anymore. And why don't we start to say, hey, let's technologies so that we can start doing those kinds of things again, without necessarily having to arrange too many practical meetings and venues and things like that. So that's the one. I think that we've got a massive opportunity in the province with all the virtual meetings that are taking place right now. All the bid committee meetings are virtual. To immediately make those meeting codes open. And it will take some planning and will take some coordination around that, but it's such a wonderful opportunity we've got. The other one is if we look though at the challenge that the province has had has not really been in the open tenders process where the corruption has been. It's been in the closed tenders. And so how can we put those touch points in closed tenders to bring transparency out into the public? And maybe there are smaller meetings. I mean, one of the big things that the new public procurement bill does is it says that even closed tenders need to go through bid committees. We don't do that at the moment. We're really just using the bid committee system for open tenders. And so there could be something very quickly that we could do to say, hey, let's also put a closed tender. Let's put an emergency. Let's put an urgent through a bid committee system and make that open. And then lastly, this is just a challenge. Ayanda, please mute me if I'm talking too much. One of the challenges we've got, and I just note the title of your presentation was Innovation in Procurement. And one of the challenges we've got as a country is we are extremely compliance focused. We award compliance. We recognize compliance. We recognize people when they're not compliant. But we don't recognize innovation in procurement. And I think we can do a lot more as a public sector to start recognizing innovation in procurement and not just compliance. Because in a way, they conflict with each other. The need to comply for many people in SCM is seen as a restriction, as a way to avoid being innovative. And so maybe, as you rightfully said in the beginning, well done on Gauteng Provincial Treasury for having the clean audits. But the consequence of that is that we're not recognizing the innovation, and maybe there's that balance that we need to try and have is to also recognize that, because we applaud compliance, but we're not recognizing innovation. Just a thought. Ayanda, I've said too much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'll allow Mr. Ngwenya to respond.
Yes, I will. Sometimes I think the other ideas are quite welcome. Your opening up of the other levels, the recording on YouTube. That's very, very, I think it's something we'll think about. But there are two things I want to emphasize. It's a decision already taken, Sean, that all tenders in future will be subjected to OTP. I'm talking about in the closed tenders. That's a principal position we've taken.
Fantastic.
It's a question of how far we go, but we have already taken, the decision is there. So we'll try and avoid that, because for as long as they've closed tenders, that is where suspicion comes in. So a decision has been taken to that effect. But I like the point of innovation. During my earlier days at Treasury, before Treasury became Treasury, we had a unit called innovation. It was the innovation unit, which would look into all processes, operational processes within, well, various programs, but even inclusive of SCM. And we're encouraging employees to literally go beyond the normal stereotypes, the compliance issue, and look at ways of how we can improve efficiencies. We would then recognize that. I remember if your innovation is quite good, you would even be awarded something like 50,000. We've had a couple of those winners in the past. It died in natural death, obviously. So I'm saying that, for instance, there's something that we introduced at that point, but more HR related, that for the first time, we introduced e-recruitment. For the first time, you could apply for positions in the then Department of Finance, using your phone, that sort of thing. And it was recognized and also paid for. So I'm saying that probably you are right. The whole thing of innovation in itself must go beyond the normal routine. Let's look at ways of adding value to the process and recognize that. If it means that there's some kind of intellectual property attached to that, so be it. But whoever came with that, if there could be some recognition, so be it. It may not be necessarily monetary recognition. It may well be a trip to UNISA for a year to study in NQF level 8, whatever it is. But recognition, I agree with you. I think the entire government must embrace that. I know we're talking about procurement, but innovation in general. That talks to what I was saying in terms of entrepreneurship, because it talks to those kinds of things. Sean, that's a very, very good idea. I think we did do it within those premises where I am, but I think there's need to reinstate that, so to encourage any member of the staff within the space to think beyond what they normally do, so that they're creative, but they're recognized for that, and in whatever format. But I like that. So thanks for your input.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open the floor again for if there are any questions that you would like to ask directly. I'm also just going to advise, one of the requests in the chat was to share the recording, and you can email info@isca.org.za to request the recording. I will also put that email address in the chat, but you can request it through that email address. I'm going back to Sean, because one of the questions I did not pick up in the chat was to do with probity, and I note that you had some comments with regards to some probity. So I'm going to open up to Sean to say, would you like to elaborate on his question?
Thanks, Ayanda. This is just maybe a caution and just some thoughts as well on this one. Probity, as it's been adopted by Gauteng province, is very much a compliance practice. And if I look back at the work that I've done in unpacking probity in other jurisdictions around the world, it has got nothing to do with compliance. And I think we've fallen into a little bit of a trap here with the auditing profession in the country that has created this offering called a probity audit, which really becomes a compliance audit. And probity is in procurement, in public procurement, is far more of an issue around the evidence of transparency. I think we've got to be careful in the province that we don't adopt too closely this focus of probity around compliance. It's what PRASA did. PRASA was the first public entity that I'm aware of that adopted probity audits. The audits the approach they took was a compliance approach. And it did not help with corruption. Compliance is not a corruption issue. Probity is a transparency issue. I don't know if I'm making sense. It's a transparency issue, and it's and so the audit should be where do we not have transparency in our processes, as opposed to where are we complying or not complying. And so I just caution the province to be careful about just going with the flow of the audit profession's service offering that they've put together to say, hey, we provide probity audits, which is a compliance audit. In public procurement elsewhere in the world, it's got nothing to do with compliance. It's around how do we understand where in the process do we not have the evidence of transparency of what's taking place. And I have, Dr. John, I'm not sure if you've seen in any of the sessions I've had with in training, but I often ask the question jokingly, if I was to phone as a supplier, if I was to phone somebody in the department and ask them some questions, would they give me the information that I ask for? And there's always a debate around whether they would or wouldn't, and they've just fallen into the trap of evidence of transparency. We should not be having phone calls with suppliers. Just a thought there around probity. Just be careful about the compliance emphasis versus the transparency emphasis. Thanks.
Ayanda, thanks. Let me just comment briefly. Sean, you're right, except that our context for now is slightly different. We're battling with two things. One, compliance issues, sadly lacking. Maybe that we believe that the capacity issues or the skills from the auditors helps us in terms of our own requirements there. But also coupled with the open tender philosophy, that's where the transparency comes in. But your caution is correct that if we then put lots of reliance on the compliance, we're missing out on the openness, on the transparent part of it. That is okay. But my view is that the use of the auditors for now is purely to help us with the compliance and capacity issues. But I don't think, in fact, there's a thinking that this is not a long-term solution for us. The long-term solution is for us to be able to deal with the compliance issues without involving auditors at all and focus on the OTP. Like I said earlier, all tenders in future will be open. But I think for now, it's more of something that we need without looking at the global application. But as for us, where we are, we have serious capacity gaps, and the auditors I'm part of one BC at the moment, where their input is quite valid in terms of, oh guys, are you aware ABC is wrong? Are you aware this does not comply with so? Oh, we do not know. I think from that, we need them for now, but as a permanent feature, I agree with you, we might run into problems, but more emphasis should be on the openness, on the transparency. But thanks for the caution. We'll definitely think about it as well.
Thank you. I now see Nombulelo Mbeki's hand is raised again. Perhaps she is available to take herself off mic and comment or respond or ask a question.
Yes, DDG.
Thank you, Sean. You represented us very well. Thank you, Chairperson. I want to take a bite on question that has been raised by Sean. John is correct. I would say we have a mix of theory that we use. But Sean, you're welcome. We can discuss it, further discuss it outside this meeting. Maybe you can assist us. But I'll give an example. When we do the specification, probity auditors are there to look at compliance. You know, if bid members are appointed in writing, and the specification is not biased, and so on. So when they look at biasness, that is transparency. They are in the gap for the suppliers to make sure that the specification is not meant for a specific company. And then when we do bid evaluation, they are there. When we do to look at compliance, and I can say for now, we are fortunate to have auditing firms that understand our precepts and what need to be done. Some of the tenders that have been cancelled, it's because we didn't adhere to the PPR 2017. So that tells me that the probity auditors understand what we need to comply to as a government state and promoting the open tender procedure. But we can further engage in this because there are other departments that are interested outside the province. We can assist. We can even give them correct information. Thank you.
Thank you, Nombulelo Mbeki, for that clarity and just providing more insight into the issues of probity versus transparency versus compliance. At this juncture, I will then once again open the floor to anyone in the room who would like to take themselves off the mic and ask any questions. I also welcome the person who's come in from, they say all the way from Bangkok. So I welcome them also to the session. As indicated, we are streaming live on Facebook. So welcome to all those who are actually joining us as well on Facebook. With no one coming off the mic, and I have checked the chats, I'm really at this point going to, okay, now I'm not too sure. Sean, Scott, I see your hand raised. I don't know if it's an old one or you are raising your hand.
And I just wanted to ask if there is any feedback on how the specifications repository is going, and you know, what some of the things are that they're finding that are maybe shortcomings that maybe can be helped with, or gaps that can be plugged. I think that's a fantastic initiative by the province to actually get that e-specifications portal going. So well done.
Thank you.
Can I take advantage of the DDGs here? She's running right.
Nombulelo Mbeki, if you can respond. I think there's been a delegation that has happened in our presence.
Good afternoon. I didn't get the question, but it was about the specification bank. Can Sean repeat?
So any kind of shortcomings that you've seen that maybe can be closed? Any real enablers that can maybe be shared with other provinces, real positive points? I think it's a real significant thing that you've done. So just maybe some thoughts on how it's going and some experiences, maybe things that have worked, things that are not working.
What we did, thanks Sean for that. What we did as a province is that what goes into our specification bank are specifications that have been pre-audited to make sure that whatever is there has been pre-audited and it's like assurance approved, quality assurance approved. So to kill the gap of specification being amended and so on. And if someone requests for specification, we would give them in a PDF and then work on that. And then we open it for them once they have agreed, given inputs. And if they are material, it goes back to the specification committee. But if not material, it's very close to what the auditors have audited, then they can use it. So that's how we are managing the risk. And with regards to sharing with provinces, no, it's only for the departments within the province. I hope I've answered you.
Thank you, ma'am. Very good.
I do think that's also, I agree with you, Sean, that's a great initiative. That would be great if it could be replicated across the country. And actually not just in the public sector, but also in the private sector, looking at specification banks. I think that is something that is a takeaway from both public and private, as well as throughout the country. So definitely echoing your thoughts, Sean. Are there any other questions? I'm going to once again, for the last time, open the floor. If anyone would like to ask a question, or perhaps there's some question in the chat or comment that I did not pick up, taking this opportunity to allow you to ask or your question or make your comment, and open it up to the floor. I see that Josephat Ngwesa has taken himself off the mic. I don't know if you have a question or it was just an error.
Actually, I'm late for the meeting. It should be ending.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm late for the meeting. It's not like I had a question.
Okay, not a problem. You're welcome to request the recording of this particular meeting from info@iasca.org.za. And that's welcome to anybody who has joined us or might have joined us late. The recording will be available.
Yeah, that will be fine. Thank you so much, Ayanda.
Thank you. No problem. Seeing as there are no further questions, and I think I've attended to all the comments on the chat, I'm going to take this opportunity to firstly thank Dr. Ngwenya for his presentation, for sharing the insights with us. And I'm going to ask him if he would like to say just a few closing words or a comment before we close the session officially. Dr. Ngwenya, I'll hand over to you for some last comments or issues that you'd like to raise.
Yeah, just to thank the audience for listening to me, and that I want to once more emphasize the need to be very creative, innovative, and we use the platform of e-commerce and supply chain as a springboard into the future. Let's not be restricted by the current regulatory environment, but we can go beyond that. And most important, I think let's not leave our youth behind in the whole thing. If there's a way of assisting them to be adults, not to remain children for life, let's exploit ways within our space and make sure that they are more independent. And finally, I think we should drive the whole notion of making SCM to be on the same platform as the chartered accountant. I think we need to make sure that the whole question of capacity, certification, and is driven to the limit. And let's pour all our resources to empower ourselves so that we are counted among the best. And those who have been longer in the field, let's share whatever we think will help those who will come after us. Otherwise, thank you for the platform, and let's engage on this. Many of us, let's come and share experiences. For me, I was quite excited to say a word or two and to share what I think is worth sharing. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody. Thanks, Prof. Thanks, Ayanda.
Thank you, Dr. Ngwenya. And once again, thanks to the audience for participating and joining us. This was brought to you by the African Institute of Supply Chain Research, where we have every month, we have at the last Tuesday of the month, we do have this Game Changer series, where we have the likes of Dr. Ngwenya who come and share with us insights on different areas of supply chain research, sharing their experiences, their industry expertise. I think Dr. Ngwenya was just a great example of the kind of presenters that we have. So thank you, Dr. Ngwenya, on behalf of the ISCA. And I've also indicated, put on the chat, where if anyone would like to get recordings of this particular session, you can go to info@isca.org.za to request the recordings. And with that, I will say thank you for the last time. Enjoy your evening and looking forward to your participation on the last Tuesday of August. Good evening, everybody, and thank you.
Good evening, Chair. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Well done, Dr. Ngwenya. Fantastic. Well done. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, John.